A timid young woman was forced into a marriage not meant for her, her sister's blind millionaire fiancé. Yet in that darkness, something fragile began to stir, a love daring to grow beyond deception and judgment. Sometimes, isn't it true, that not seeing is the only way to truly see? Down the aisle. Now. No one asked Valeria if she agreed. Her mother's hand, icy and unyielding, clamped around her wrist, pulling her toward the gown that glittered like a trap. Celeste isn't coming. Her mother's voice was sharp, merciless. You'll take her place. Walk that aisle immediately. The tiny dressing chamber seemed to suffocate her. The air thick with perfume, the clicking of heels, the assistant's rushed whispers, the pounding from the coordinator at the door. It all pressed in until her head rang. Valeria said nothing, not because she agreed, but because her voice had collapsed beneath the weight of her mother's fury. If this wedding falls apart, we'll starve in the streets, her mother hissed. Your sister refuses, so you must. You owe me that. And Celeste, her sister, stood watching, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. You always wanted to be the bride, she said coolly, so play the role until the curtain falls. No one asked what Valeria desired. It didn't matter. The decision had already been sealed. The dress was pressed, her name scrawled over the license, and the man, Lucien Drake, stood waiting at the altar. Blind, powerful, rich, the family's golden chance. Too important to lose, too blind to notice the deception. For months, Valeria had been his voice on the phone, pretending to be Celeste. Every laugh rehearsed, every word calculated. Even her perfume chosen carefully. Her mother, drilling her daily until perfection was reached. Because Celeste had no patience for foolish sentiment. Now, the lie was walking her straight into St. Vincent's Cathedral, beneath stained glass and candlelight, in front of reporters, society's elite, and a groom who couldn't see, but could sense everything. She walked the aisle like it was the edge of an abyss. The dress had been shoved onto her minutes earlier, the makeup smeared into flawless shape, the shoes forced onto trembling feet as the wedding car pulled up. Lucien stood at the altar like a statue, calm, immovable, his blind eyes half closed, head tilted as though he were listening to something no one else could hear. Did he know? Did he already suspect? The minister's voice filled the hush. Valeria Quinn, do you take Lucien Drake to honor, to love in duty and in life, until death parts you? The air froze. From the corner of her eye, Valeria caught her mother's sharp nod. Celeste's smirk curved, cruel and satisfied. Her voice cracked. I do. Lucien tilted his head toward her. His voice, low and cutting, brushed across her skin. Why are you trembling? Afraid I'll see you? It wasn't a joke. For one fleeting instant, she felt as if he had seen. Applause crashed like thunder. The crowd rose, cameras zoomed in. She smiled, not from joy, but for survival, for the cameras, for her mother, for Celeste, who sat at the back with victory gleaming in her eyes. It would be only a day, Valeria told herself. A performance. Enough to fool the world, sign the papers, then vanish from the life of a man she was never meant to marry. But the thought didn't calm her. The ring on her finger weighed heavy, colder than ice. And before she could truly feel its weight, she was already seated in the car, beside her new husband, Lucien. A stranger she knew by voice alone. The doors shut. St. Vincent's Cathedral blurred into the night behind tinted glass. Ahead stretched darkness. Lucien sat upright, hands folded, eyes closed. Not asleep, but listening. He was always listening. To her unsteady breathing, the brush of silk as she shifted, the faint tap of her shoe against the floor. He recorded it all, as if composing. Music in silence, Valeria fought to breathe evenly. In her head, her mother's warning and Celeste's scorn replayed like shackles. From this moment on, she had to live as Lucien's wife. No mistakes, no slips, no forgotten details, but as soon as she stepped into the Drake estate, everything began to unravel. It wasn't a home. It was a museum, a gallery designed by a man who never saw light, perfect but lifeless. Dim corridors, doors that opened at a whisper, flowers arranged but scentless, walls covered in black and white photographs, never a single portrait. The butler bowed. "Congratulations, ma'am." Lucien's hand rested briefly at her back, guiding her into the dining room. No speeches, no toast, no music, only silence. A long table stretched endlessly, 2 plates set like tokens under cold white light. Lucien sat opposite her. His voice slid into the stillness, soft yet piercing. "Your voice, it's different." Her stomach dropped. "Different how?" "Softer, slower. There's a rasp at the end." She never had that. Valeria steadied her breath. "Maybe I'm just tired. It's been a long day." Lucien inhaled lightly, as if the air itself betrayed her. "And your perfume. It's not the one you usually wear." Her chest tightened. "I forgot to put it on." He nodded once. Nothing more. Yet the silence between them thickened, as though he was reading her in ways she couldn't escape. Dinner passed like punishment, the food bitter on her tongue. Lucien's every movement deliberate, exact. When she finally tried to rise, his voice caught her. "Do you remember our first call?" Her hands stilled. "Our first call?" "Yes." "I spoke of Paris. You told me about your cello." Her lips parted. She froze. That had been Celeste, long before Valeria stepped in to play the part. "Oh, right," she whispered, her lie faltering. "I said I wanted to open a—" Lucien's blind eyes turned toward her, unblinking, unyielding. "A music school," he finished softly. "For children. You said you wanted them to feel what you felt when you played." Her blood ran cold. He remembered everything. And in that terrible silence, Valeria knew he might not see her with his eyes, but he was closer to seeing the truth than anyone else had ever been. "Bookstore by the lake." Lucien tilted his head. No, she never said that. Valeria froze in place. Lucien set down his fork, his fingers brushing his napkin like ending the final note of a somber song. "It's fine," he said. "I have a very good memory sometimes, so good it makes people uncomfortable." She didn't answer, just stared into her water glass, wishing it was something stronger she hadn't expected the blind man to see so clearly. That night she entered the bedroom, wide, cold, immaculate, but no room for emotion, the space between the two. Pillows felt endless. Lucien lay on his side, turned away. Valeria lay on the edge of the bed, afraid to move. The wind slipped through the cracked window. She stared at the ceiling, tears falling silently. Then Lucien's voice came quiet, not directed. At her, but piercing through every inch of space. "I don't need eyes to recognize a lie." Valeria didn't know who he meant, but that sentence, it struck something deep inside her. Maybe the scariest part isn't being found out. Maybe it's being understood. So thoroughly, so intimately, that there's nothing left to hide. So what do you think? Is Lucien suspicious or already certain? Is he waiting for Valeria to confess? Perhaps the answer isn't in what's said, but in the gaze of a man who never needed sight. To see the truth. And would you keep playing the part, or take off the mask when the other person was never blind to begin with, after a night spent sharing the same room, but feeling worlds apart? Valeria couldn't sleep. She counted every time. He shifted, listened to every breath as if trying to figure out whether this man hated her, but Lucien did nothing. No accusations, no questions, no touch. His silence wasn't indifference. It was a wall, thin, soft, but cold as ice. She thought she'd be exposed. But the next morning, Lucien still treated her like his lawful wife. Valeria began to live in his world. A world of quiet, of precision, without noise or chaos. And in that silence, something unexpected began to happen. She started to want to stay. She used to think the silence in this house was the worst part. But then she realized maybe it was her presence that was changing things little by little. She woke earlier, went into the kitchen to make breakfast the way she'd learned he liked it from tips the assistant had whispered to her. She stopped calling for the staff. She cleaned and rearranged his study, a room left untouched, sealed in silence since the accident. Lucian didn't ask anything. He simply touched the edge of the desk, the bookshelf, the pen holder, and said nothing. But that night he asked quietly, "She never stepped into this room." Valeria's breath caught for a beat. She knew who she was. "Celeste, I know," she said. "I just wanted to make it a little more comfortable for you." Lucian didn't respond, but his fingers curled tightly around the wooden armrest. That afternoon, they walked together in the garden. For the first time, Lucian let her lead him without his cane. The breeze was gentle. She described the flowers slowly. Purple, lavender, white daisies, hydrangeas beginning to wilt. He didn't interrupt, but then asked, "You don't tell me about orchids anymore?" She froze. That had been Celeste. Celeste had once spoken to him about orchids, not her. "I thought maybe today." "The other flowers deserve to speak," she whispered. Lucienne smiled for the first time, but it wasn't a peaceful smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they realize they're speaking to a different soul. Night fell. A soft amber glow filled the living room. Only the wind through the windows and the soft creak of wood remained. Valeria sat and read to him. Not Shakespeare or Bronte like Celeste once had, but a gentle, quiet novel. Lucian didn't comment, but he tilted his head. His breathing. "Deepening your voice," he said, after she stopped reading. "It's warmer the way you touch me is softer, even your silence, and feels different." Valeria put the book down, her hands tightening on the armrest. He turned his face toward her, blind eyes, yet unflinchingly. "Direct if you're someone else," he paused. "I think I might like you more." She didn't respond. Her heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to believe it was a confession, but maybe it was a quiet unveiling, a gentle way of saying, "I know." And in that long, tender silence, something began to stir, a little care, a little fear, a flicker of something unnamed between two people bound in a strange marriage, one who couldn't see and one who had never been truly seen. That morning, Valeria sat alone in the old study she had just finished cleaning. Sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, glinting off picture frames that held no photos. She didn't know why she was there. Maybe because it was the one place no one ever entered. Maybe because for the first time she wanted to just be herself. Even if only for a few stolen minutes, the door burst open. No knock, no warning. Celeste walked in like the house belonged to her. Behind her came their mother, heels striking the floor like a ticking death sentence. "We need to talk," her mother said. Valeria sat up straight, trying to stay calm. "About what?" Celeste didn't answer. She strolled around the room, fingers grazing the wooden desk before picking up a book, then tossed it back. With a sharp, cutting thud, "The thing is, you're getting a little too deep into character." Valeria stayed silent. "The maids say you make breakfast for Lucien, take him on walks, sit by his bed, reading every night." Celeste let out a mocking laugh, shaking her head seriously. "Val, dial it back. Did you forget who you're supposed to be pretending to be?" Their mother cut in, her voice slow and venomous. "You really think he's going to marry you again? He belongs to Celeste, to this family, not to you." Valeria looked up. Meeting their eyes for the first time, she wasn't angry, but something softened quietly in her gaze. "He's not who you think he is," she said. Celeste laughed loud and cruel. "Not who we think he is? What, not some blind fool easy to manipulate?" Valeria clenched the edge of her chair. "He's kind. He's perceptive. He deserves to be treated with decency no matter who loves him." The room fell into a rare moment of silence. Their mother raised an eyebrow, looking at her like she was a child who had just spoken a fantasy aloud. "You really think he cares about you?" Her voice turned to ice. "You're a placeholder. Valeria, he doesn't. Know who you are. He loves Celeste. And if he finds out the truth, what do you think he'll do?" Celeste added, twisting the knife. "You think he'll forgive the woman who impersonated someone else, or spit in your face for lying next to him under my name?" Valeria pressed her lips together, but this time her eyes didn't well up. She stood faced them both. "If he finds out and he chooses to walk away, I'll still know I did the right thing because at least I never treated him like a transaction." The two women froze just for a moment. Then her mother spoke like casting a curse. "Don't fool yourself into thinking this is love. You're borrowing a place that was never yours, and when I take it back, you won't have the right to cry." The door slammed behind them. Valeria stood still. She had never fought back like that before, but the strangest part was this time she wasn't afraid. All that remained now was a single question. If Lucien knew everything, would he see her as a betrayer, or the only one who ever treated him with honesty when the door closed behind her? Mother and Celeste Valeria didn't cry, she didn't scream, but something inside her cracked, not a shattering quake, but a slow, quiet fracture, like someone carving away at the last layers of trust she had left. She left the room and wandered down the long hallway to the back veranda. Sunset was fading. The final light of day slanted through the sheer curtains, painting the garden in a pale orange hue, delicate, fleeting. Like her, Valeria sat at the edge of the porch, where the sun's last rays were slipping beneath the trees, swaying in the wind. She hugged her knees to her chest as if they were the only thing keeping her from falling into the endless black void inside her. Her mother's voice still echoed in her ears. Celeste's laugh folded into it like a cruel whisper in a locked basement. "You're just a second-rate copy you don't get to love." She hadn't fought back as much as she'd wanted. She'd only managed. One sentence, "He's a good man," and somehow that was enough to make her mother laugh, as if she'd just heard a cheap, ridiculous joke. Valeria buried her head in her arms. Her tears no longer fell in waves, they came one by one, heavy and slow like her. Heart wasn't beating anymore, just bleeding behind her. There was the faintest sound she didn't need to turn around. Lucien, he sat down beside her. No questions, no words, just silence. But it wasn't empty. It was thick, weighty, full of everything neither of them could yet say. After a long moment, his voice came low and steady. "Have you ever wished you were someone else?" Valeria looked up, the question pierced straight through her ribs. "Yes," she whispered. "Every day?" Lucien nodded slightly without judgment. Then he leaned in his hand, reaching out to touch hers, not to hold, just to touch, like he needed to make sure she was still there. "If one day I get to see you," he paused as if tasting the weight of his words, "I'm afraid I won't want to look away." Valeria turned toward him, aching to meet his gaze, even though she knew it wouldn't matter. He couldn't see her. And yet, in that exact moment, she felt more seen than ever before. She tried to say something, but her throat burned, her heartbeat stumbled, her words dissolved into breath. Lucien didn't wait for a response. He pulled his hand back, stood slowly. The breeze tousled his hair across his forehead. He stopped, his back to her. "There are some things you can only see Mars without your eyes." Then he walked away, leaving Valeria alone with the last trace of sunlight and a heart beginning to tremble with something that felt dangerously close to breaking free. Lucien didn't go back inside right away. He stood beneath the awning for a while, his back still turned as if weighing something, whether to speak or carry the thought with him forever. At last he spoke quietly, slowly but enough to stop Valeria's breath. "Tomorrow I'm going to the hospital." She looked up, startled. He turned slightly, not quite facing her, but his voice was bare, without armor. "There's a doctor in Switzerland, an experimental procedure. They say the odds aren't great, but there's hope." Valeria opened her mouth, but no words came, no blessing, no protest, because anything she said now would cut both ways. Lucien bowed his head, his hands buried in his coat pockets. You know what scares me most? He said, his tone soft with something deeper than fear. It's not that it might not work. He paused, then gave a faint, almost bitter smile. It's that I might open my eyes and no longer recognize the world I used to think was beautiful. Because it turns out, it wasn't what I imagined. Then he walked into the dark, leaving Valeria frozen. On the porch, the wind crept across her shoulders, cold and sharp, whispering one quiet, devastating question. If he sees tomorrow, will he ever want to look at her again? Time after the surgery passed as slowly as pages in a book. No one was turning. Valeria didn't ask much. Lucienne didn't offer. She remained by his side every day like part of the house itself. She smiled. Less stayed silent. More because the closer they got to the day he might see again, the more terrified she became of what that would mean. And then that morning came a morning touched by soft sunlight, birds chirping at the window, and a pair of eyes about to open after 2 years of darkness. The sky was unusually clear, as if it too held its breath waiting for something monumental to unfold. The recovery room glowed white, quiet with machines humming in the background like a soft warning. No one spoke loudly, no one rushed. The air was compressed like the hush before a storm. Valeria sat beside the bed, hands clasped. In her lap, cold and tight today, the doctor would remove Lucienne's bandages, the eyes she had once touched with trembling fingers, the eyes she once wished could see her first, but now that wish made it hard to breathe. No Celeste makeup, no Dior. Perfume, no silk dress. Just Valeria, plain, bare, real. A woman sitting on the edge of truth, about to lose everything she never meant to love. Lucienne lay still. The final layers of gauze were removed. He kept his eyes closed a moment longer, then blinked, as if testing a part of himself that had long been asleep, and then he opened them. Light poured in, fierce, immediate, but he didn't flinch. His gaze swept across the room, then stopped directly in front of him. Was her Valeria. Froze, her breath caught. In her throat she couldn't move, couldn't blink. Her heart thudded wildly, her chest ached from the weight of a hope she dared not hold. Lucienne looked at her. He didn't squint, he didn't recoil, he didn't turn away. He simply looked like he had expected, to see her not with surprise but recognition. Valeria opened her mouth, but no sound came, only her eyes full of something between fear and love. "You're not Celeste," Lucienne said, his voice quiet, measured like a verdict that had long been deliberated. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel, but for Valeria, it landed like a blow, not to her face, but to the last fragile pieces of whatever self-pity protection she had left. She flinched, stepping back half a pace, hands clenched, lips trembling. Any excuse, any explanation suddenly felt hollow. But Lucian didn't stop. He sat up, eyes never leaving hers. "I've known her for a long time from your voice, from the way you sat. The T on the left, instead of the right, from how you say I'm sorry, like no one's ever forgiven you before." Valeria wept no longer. Quiet tears, she collapsed into herself, covering her face like a child. Her whole body shook, not from shame, but from the fear that maybe, even after everything, she wasn't worthy of being loved. Why, she choked out, her voice breaking like wet paper. "Why didn't you say something sooner? Why did you let me keep lying to you?" Lucian walked toward her, every step closing. The distance between them and toward the truth they'd both been afraid of, he stopped, stood before her, lowered himself, and gently touched her face, wiping away the bitter tears. "Because I was waiting," he said, "to see if you could love me as a man and not just as the final role in your family's game." Valeria looked up. Her eyes met his eyes, newly born into light, still adjusting, still blurred, but warmer than the first sun of spring. Lucian took a breath, and for the first time, he said her real name, Valeria. He didn't say it with anger. It wasn't an accusation, it was a truth. A name stripped of disguise, a word never spoken aloud. Now made sacred by the way it left his lips, Valeria broke again. But this time she didn't hide her face, she let it happen. Let him see. Lucienne whispered, "I didn't love you because you reminded me of someone. I loved you because you dared to be different, because you loved me when I had nothing left to offer but blindness and loneliness." He pulled her into an embrace light, as thread, but tight enough to wrap around a heart just starting to heal. At the doorway, Celeste appeared silent, still watching everything she could no longer change. Lucian didn't look at her. He only murmured, "Perhaps to himself I was blind, but in the dark I saw you most clearly." And Valeria, for the first time in her life, didn't need to be anyone else too. After the day Lucien opened his eyes, nothing changed in the loud, dramatic way Valeria had imagined. There was no shouting, no grand exit, no announcement of endings, only silence, a heavy, careful kind of silence, like the two of them were walking across thin ice beneath which lived all the things they hadn't yet dared to name. Lucien didn't push her away, but he didn't pull her closer either. He remained polite, gentle, just as he always had, except now his eyes could see, and that more than anything terrified Valeria. She felt seen, but also more exposed than ever before. For a full week, they lived under the same roof, like strangers who had once loved each other in another life. They avoided sitting at the same table, avoided walking in the garden at the same time, avoided brushing shoulders when passing in narrow hallways. But avoidance doesn't last forever. That afternoon, the sky was overcast. The back garden smelled of herbs drying, the season beginning to shift. Valeria sat on a wrought iron chair beside the wilted lavender. Lucian came outside slowly, without intent, but still stopped in front of her. They sat across from each other like participants in a quiet meeting, where both knew this might be the final page. Valeria kept her gaze low. Her voice was hoarse, not from tears, but from everything she'd never spoken aloud. "I didn't come for you, Lucienne," she began. "I came because of a promise, a phone call I couldn't turn away from." Lucien didn't react, but his hands tightened slightly in his lap, as if even now it still hurt. Valeria continued this time, daring to meet his eyes. Those eyes now filled with light, yet carrying something remarkably close to sadness. "But I stayed. Not for the promise, I stayed for you, for the nights I read to you, for the moments I wiped your forehead, for every small touch. I was too afraid to let you know was real." Lucien closed his eyes, then opened them again. He didn't cry, but something had softened in him. He spoke slowly, his voice lower than usual. "You were the only one who didn't try to control me when I couldn't see. You didn't give me orders. You didn't tell me how to live. You just sat with me and listened." That sentence stopped. Valeria, in her breath, she wanted to speak, but only shook her head. Instead, "I don't need your forgiveness," she whispered. "I only need you to see me as me." Lucien didn't reply right away. He looked at her for a long moment, like he was reading every layer of emotion on her face. Then he stood, not hurriedly, but like something had finally settled in him. After days of silence, he reached out his hand. "If you're still here tomorrow morning." Valeria looked up. Her hand trembled. "Then stay. Not because I need you, but because I want to start over with you." He paused, his eyes catching what little light was left in the sky for the first time. Without pretending to be anyone else, Valeria raised her hand to her mouth as if to steady something breaking open inside her. She didn't nod. She didn't cry. But in her eyes, something had been returned to her, a sense of worth, a flicker of hope, a quiet, rightful place in someone's heart without having to trade away who she was to earn it 1 year later in the mountains of Oregon, where the morning mist blankets the pine forests and sunlight visits like an old, gentle friend. There's a small center tucked beside a clear, still lake. On its simple wooden sign, hand-carved words read, "The Touch of Light." Lucienne and Valeria live there. They don't call it hiding. They call it rebirth each morning. Valeria guides blind students around the lake, teaching them to sense their path through sound scent and the rhythm of their own hearts. Lucienne teaches music, something he once dismissed as meaningless. Now he teaches through sight, through touch, and with a voice more tender than it's ever been. No one here calls him a millionaire. They call him the man who could see in the dark, and Valeria, no one calls her by the wrong name anymore. At the same time, in a luxurious villa in Florida, Celeste is now married to a young senator, handsome, ambitious, with a bright political future. But 4 months ago, a car accident took the sight from both his eyes. Now, each morning, Celeste brews his tea, chooses his shirts with help from a fashion assistant, and learns how to describe a sunset to someone who will never see one, that blind man. Sweet Trusting calls her the light of his life every time he says it. Celeste smiles. But no one knows that her smile always ends in the faintest curl of her lip, followed by a silence as long as memory. One morning, while sitting at her vanity applying a touch of red lipstick out of old habit, her assistant's voice came through the Bluetooth speaker. In today's headlines, entrepreneur Lucienne Drake has been awarded the International Humanitarian Award for his work with the blind community alongside his wife Valeria Quinn. Celeste's hand froze. The lipstick trembled in her palm. A second later, she laughed quietly. Not bitter, not sharp, just dry, brief, like something inside her had fallen into the deepest part of herself. She set the lipstick down, poured the tea for her husband, and as she placed the cup in his hands, she leaned in close and whispered, "Soft enough for the wind to carry away, but never soft enough for a heart to forget. I'm not the light, my love. I'm just the shadow who stood in the wrong place. Love does not punish, but it never forgets. And in the end, the ones who love truthfully will see the ones who pretend will perform forever until there's no audience left to believe them. Thank you for walking this journey with Valeria and Lucian to the very end. If this story touched something in your heart, leave a comment or simply share it to let this light travel further. And if you'd like to follow more stories that just might make your heart break beautifully, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because who knows, the next story might be yours.